It was a hot day in 1933. Maurice Wilson, a well-known British man, was firmly gripping the stick of his small open-air plane, watching the fuel tank run low. He had only learned to fly a plane 2 months earlier, but his biggest concern wasn't the fuel running out at thousands of feet. Rather, it was a long list of problems. Some British officers, whom he had left behind in Bahrain, the certainty of being arrested upon landing in Iran, the Persian Gulf's rolling waves below, and the growing possibility that he might not reach a safe place before the fuel ran out. Yet, Wilson kept moving forward because the mission he had embarked upon was far greater than these minor issues. His mission was to crash this very airplane into the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest. Welcome once again to Discover TV's videos, dear viewers. Maurice Wilson was born on April 21, 1898, in York, in the house of a middle-class textile mill owner. Had the Great War not started when he was 16, he might have joined the family textile business. But instead, he followed in the footsteps of his elder brother Victor and joined the British Army on his 18th birthday. He was desperate to go to the battlefield. Eventually, in November 1917, Wilson was sent to France, where the Germans were attacking the British Army. By 7 a.m., the Germans had surrounded 3 out of 4 companies in Wilson's battalion. But Wilson, who was in the remaining D Company, kept firing blindly at the Germans from a machine gun post. Wilson was incredibly stubborn, the kind of stubbornness that could get someone killed. But he made it out of the war unscathed, the last soldier in his company who was not injured. He was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery, as his efforts had helped stop the German attack. However, only a few months after receiving the award, in June, Wilson was sent back to the front line. On July 19, 1918, Wilson was advancing with a small team when a German machine gunner spotted him and opened fire. He was hit in the back and left arm but survived. These wounds caused pain and weakness in his arm, which would follow him for life. For several months, Wilson remained hospitalized due to his injuries. He was then assigned to a reserve battalion, but it seemed trouble was written in his fate. Upon arriving, he contracted the flu that was rapidly spreading worldwide at the time. This illness brought him back to a hospital bed, and there the First World War ended. During treatment, Wilson wrote a letter to the War Ministry requesting a pension for his injuries, but the ministry rejected the request, stating that according to military doctors, his injuries weren't serious enough to merit compensation. This denial deeply saddened Wilson and sowed seeds of rebellion in his heart against the ruling system, a resentment that remained with him.
In 1919, Wilson was sent to Dembella Ford. There he faced the same question many other World War soldiers faced. We made so many sacrifices, suffered injuries, but got nothing in return. Wilson was now broken inside. He wanted to do something significant with his life. For the next 10 years, he wandered across the world. During this time, he married twice, changed multiple businesses, but by 1932, he still hadn't found the peace he sought. On top of that, the war wounds continued to torment him and his health was deteriorating. During this time, Wilson met a mystic who claimed that if Wilson fasted for a few days, all his problems would be resolved. Wilson actually fasted for a few weeks and spent his time in prayer. A few months later, he returned to society, not only fully recovered from depression, but also healed from his illness. His belief was now stronger than ever that any problem in the world could be solved by fasting and praying. Wilson began taking on new challenges. He claimed that through the power of fasting, he would accomplish something no one had ever done before. Around this time, one day he came across a newspaper article. It was about the 1924 British Mount Everest expedition, in which George Mallory and Andrew Irvine had attempted to reach the summit of Mount Everest, but Wilson had now found a purpose. He made up his mind to conquer Mount Everest alone, relying only on fasting and prayer. But the issue was how to actually climb Everest. Wilson knew that Everest expeditions cost a lot of money, required various gears, and most importantly, extensive training, all usually funded by sponsors. But Wilson wanted to bypass all these requirements and find a shortcut. In 1932, a mission named Houston Expedition was making headlines. It was the first mission in which an aircraft would fly over Mount Everest and photograph it. Keep in mind, no one had summited Everest at that point, and the world was eager to see the mountain's peak. It was then that a wild idea struck Wilson's mind. He thought he'd participate in this expedition, and when the plane flew over Everest, he would parachute down from it, thus becoming the first person to reach the summit of Everest. A few weeks later, he dismissed the idea as impossible, only to hatch an even more dangerous plan. Yes, Wilson had completely lost his mind. He planned to buy his own aircraft and crash-landed in the snow on Everest at 15,000 feet. That way, he would already cover more than half the distance, and the rest he would complete alone, with the help of fasting and prayer. It's important to understand, Maurice Wilson had no mountaineering experience nor flying expertise. He did some basic climbing practice, but never tried to learn technical mountaineering. Then he bought a 3-year-old Havilland Gypsy Moth plane, previously used in a flying circus. It was a wooden 2-seater open cabin biplane, popular in recreational aero clubs of that era. He painted Everest on the side, a self-created name, probably inspired by Everest. During pilot training, his instructor clearly told him he'd never even reach India, but Wilson stuck to his mission. Meanwhile, the British Air Ministry caught wind of his plan and didn't want him to carry out such madness. They informed Nepalese authorities, who immediately revoked Wilson's permission to enter Nepalese airspace, a major setback, as Wilson's plan was to reach Everest via Nepal. Still, determined to fulfill his mission at any cost, Wilson called the media to Stag Lane Aerodrome in London and publicly tore up the British Air Ministry's telegram, then took off without any permissions. His plane, Everest, loaded with extra fuel drums, could fly up to 750 miles. Wilson made refueling stops in Freiburg, Germany, Marseilles, France, Pisa, Naples, and Sicily in Italy. It was a beautiful, almost trouble-free journey, until he crossed the Mediterranean. In Tunisia, the police arrested him, but he was soon released. In Tunis, he accidentally filled the fuel tank with water-contaminated fuel, but luckily he managed a safe landing in the town of Gabes. After refueling properly, he flew to Libya, Tripoli, Benghazi, Tobruk, and Alexandria, heading toward Egypt. When he reached Cairo, he received terrible news. The permit to fly over Iran, which he had been assured would be waiting in Cairo, was nowhere to be found. He spent the entire day running between different British officials, but it seemed they had deliberately withheld the permit. Rather than waste more time in bureaucracy, Wilson flew straight to Baghdad. Iran now lay ahead, but he had no permission to land there, so he needed to find a new route. The problem, he didn't have a proper map. So in Baghdad, he landed and bought a children's school atlas from the market, marked his path on it, and set off toward Bahrain. Meanwhile, British officers started outsmarting Wilson by sending telegrams to his next destinations. When Wilson reached Bahrain, a British officer summoned him to his office. He told Wilson that there were no airstrips ahead for his small plane, except for one in Iran, where he'd be arrested without a permit. The officer allowed Wilson to refuel in Bahrain on one condition: he would fly straight back to London. Wilson agreed, but once in the air, instead of turning west, he went the opposite direction, east, toward India. He skirted Iran by flying along the southern edge of the Persian Gulf. In Bahrain, he had secretly spotted a new airstrip near Iran on the British officer's map in Gwadar, then part of India. After hours of flying and with fuel almost at zero, Wilson safely landed at Gwadar airstrip.
He continued his journey into British India, where the press awaited him with new excitement. He celebrated his success across India and finally reached Purnia in northeast India, very close to the Nepal border. But the long arm of the British government reached him again. At Purnia airstrip, local police were waiting. They confiscated Everest and assigned security guards to Wilson. The British government reminded him once again that despite having a plane, Wilson had no permission to fly over Nepal. Now he was truly stuck. He couldn't even fly his confiscated plane. He was caught between the British government and his dwindling funds. Finally, in July 1933, he was forced to sell Everest. His plan to crash land the plane on Everest was completely ruined, but he hadn't given up on climbing Everest. He spent the winter in Darjeeling, India, fasting, praying, and trying to obtain a permit to enter Tibet so he could attempt Everest from the Tibetan side. But all his efforts failed. At last, he began planning a secret attempt to climb Everest. On March 21, 1934, Wilson disguised himself as a Buddhist monk and began his journey on foot, crossing Sikkim to reach Tibet. After a couple of attempts, he returned from Everest Base Camp due to shortness of breath and lack of training. On May 22, 1934, Wilson set off again toward Everest, this time with two companions. These two had experience, so they reached Camp 3 in just 3 days. Wilson left them at Camp 3 and continued alone. His companions tried to stop him, but he didn't listen. It was the same stubbornness, the kind that could kill someone. Wilson gave them one last instruction. If he didn't return in 2 weeks, assume he was dead. But they waited not just 2 weeks, they waited a whole month. When Wilson didn't return to Camp 3, they descended Everest and later, by late July, informed India about Wilson's death. Another English mountaineer had become a victim of Everest's terrifying world. A year later, in 1935, Eric Shipton's Everest expedition found Wilson's body. He was lying between Mount Everest and Shanks, and near the pass known as North Col. Among his backpack, diary, and a torn tent, the last entry in his diary was from May 31, 1934. It read, "Going on again. What a beautiful day it is. We hope you like and share this video from Discover TV. Thank you so much for your loving comments. See you in another amazing video."